Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another quest log. This week, I kind of put a question out there to some friends of mine and asked, what should I talk about? What might get people to watch this series? So one of the things that was floated was talking about, so as a dungeon master for Dungeons and Dragons, what are some of the struggles and tips that I have as a dungeon master? So I have been running Dungeons and Dragons games since middle school, so for about 16 years now. Ugh, it's a long time. Yeah, so a long time that I've been running games. Kind of fumbled through it quite a bit. Starting out, especially with second edition. I still don't understand a lot of the stuff that goes into second edition to this day. But, so to give some of my background, recently, I am currently running a monthly 5th edition game. I've run, several 4th edition games in the past, ran some 3rd edition stuff in college, heavily modified some 3rd edition stuff in college. To the point that it basically became a 4th edition game, and then 4th edition came out. But now running a 5th edition game in a homebrewed campaign setting titled Tales of Genmora. So, really, I'm really big into the world building. I guess we should start there. So, I always like to start with world building and figuring out lately, kind of especially with this Genmora world, who are the deities? Because obviously, I don't want to rule out, divine classes or have to rework them at all or whatever. So I have no problem putting a pantheon in my games. And then, sort of making it interesting. So, I mean, if you want to go with a more traditional sort of pantheon, focused around like sun god worship and stuff like that, go for it. That works. It's obviously lots of historical examples from around the globe. Or maybe, having a more variety, maybe having it be primarily, say, animistic or something. What I do is, again, I have a pantheon right now of gods and goddesses that are kind of jerks. They're primarily kind of capricious beasts of sorts, sort of like great legendary fell beasts. In that regard, kind of similar in theme to Archfey, where they kind of do what they want, and if you want to come out ahead, win their good graces and avoid making them mad. But again, it might be the slightest of things could set them off, sort of thing. So it's a very Greek style of deity, if you will. So I have that for the deities, and I kind of start down, so that you have the deities, and then working into, what your kingdoms are, where, deciding what sort of species or races that you want to have in the game, and then deciding, what sort of mixtures do you have within nations? Do you have very isolated nations? So say all the elves come from a single kingdom or a single land, and all the dwarves come from a single land. How do humans factor into this, right? Because the biggest point, especially in Dungeons and Dragons, is they play up the fact that humans are super diverse. The other species, not so much, because, I mean, when you live for 300 years, do you have as much diversity in your culture? Or are you kind of like a super sort of conservative culture and not really progressing an awful lot? Things just don't catch on very quickly. Whereas with humans, stuff is shifting all the time, and there's just a wide variety in how humans look and how humans act and everything. So thinking about do all of your humans come from one kingdom? And if that's the case, how do you explain the diversity of humans, or do you have multiple kingdoms? Are humans just scattered everywhere, like even in other kingdoms, kind of a thing? What I went was there are a bunch of major human settlements, and then they're peppered around everywhere. Um, and I've thought about some like creation myths or whatever to explain sort of a diversity of humans. But I left it, if it's something that the players want to explore, sure, we can get into that. Otherwise, like most people, don't question it. They're just like, and this is something that I feel like with real world kind of scenarios where, I think humans will seem less different from one another once, say, if there's like extraterrestrial life that looks vastly different, and say we discover that or they discover us. Again, it's kind of a long shot at this point, but if that happens, suddenly Earth becomes a lot smaller, and humanity becomes a lot more cohesive as like a single species. Because I've like, say we meet a race of lizard people, like suddenly, humans seem a lot less different from one another and more as like humans, right? So that's another thing, is thinking about, various cultures, various kingdoms, various species, sort of the geography that everything happens. I like to sort of plan out that stuff. And again, making it interesting. What I find is people are either drawn to, like, especially in my games, like, people are either drawn to humans or something weird. So, it's kind of trying to pull away from like the high fantasy archetype of like, you've got your humans, you've got your elves, you've got your dwarves, you've got your halflings, you're good to go. And instead being like, maybe you've got your humans. I like featuring lizard folk in my games because, again, like, it's psychologically, how they're presented in Volo's Guide, totally alien from humans, because of a reptilian brain. So having something that's just super different, having Warforged in the game, I think it's great. I think, it kind of opens it up to having sort of those, I mean, again, it plays up a trope, but it allows players to have that sort of journey of what does it mean to be sentient? What does it mean to be a person versus a thing? What does it mean to, have to struggle with finding an acceptance in a culture? And again, like, being a construct versus being a living creature, that sort of stuff. Or just the difficulties in relating to things that live, or not live, but breathe, eat, sleep. Things that you can't say, like, take off your arm and replace it with something easily. That your body's not modular. If you're like a regular biological creature. So yeah, doing sort of interesting things like that. Shifters, I think, are great. I think it's adds a nice touch that you can add some variety as well, with shifters. That you can have certain kinds of shifters come from certain locations based on, what the predominant fauna might be there. So you might find, say, like wolf-like shifters in forests, whereas, in mountains you might be more likely to find like ram-like shifters. So that's something to consider. Gnomes. Always have gnomes in my games. Gnomes all the time. Because gnomes are clearly the best. Once you go gnome, you never go home, right? Yeah, it's a little Warcraft tidbit for you. But as far as actually running a game, so I have tried to use maps. I find that map making for me, like if I'm able to put in the effort for it, I can do, some pretty nice looking world maps. For local maps, I can't. I've tried to. I am not I am not like a city planner. Um, I don't know if it's coming from Massachusetts, where there wasn't actually a whole lot of city planning done with our cities, where it's kind of just haphazard. But I just find trying to map out, or even just trying to plot out like what the floor plan of a house looks like, I can't do it, because I always want to be like, this doesn't look right, or this, like, to make it livable means that like it's not really suitable for an adventure kind of a thing. I would say there's plenty of map resources out there. Find work that somebody else has done if you're like me and you're not good at doing maps. Find some other maps that you can repurpose or whatever. There's plenty of free ones out there. Or if you find some really good pay ones, pay for them and get them that way. Or, if you're doing what we're doing right now and you're doing a theater of the mind game, you might not necessarily need maps. So, in which case, then it's really having more of a general layout in mind if you're sort of describing like a dungeon or something like that. What I've been doing so far is just kind of like jotting down quick notes on what certain things might be, like, how a dungeon might require certain features, but as far as like what the actual rooms and makeup are, it's kind of just on the fly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So there is that. Like, for example, for the town that we're in, I haven't made up a map of the town. It's kind of just general, like, oh, well, over in this district you have these things, and in this district you have these things. Generally, like, this district's on this side of town, this district's on this side of town. But as far as, where individual buildings are, it's kind of improvised. And so far, that's worked out. I don't think it's actually been that bad. And really, with the kind of combats that we're doing, it's not really being hampered all that much by a lack of a map. So I know for the game that I'm playing in is that we use maps for sort of very local stuff and for combat. And I think with the kind of combats that we've been doing, they're kind of different than the ones that we're running in my game. And so I think it really just boils down to sort of what sort of action, in the game that I play in, it's a bit more tactical. It's larger scale because, we'll have giants or like armies of orcs and stuff like that. Whereas in the game that I run, it's mostly, if we're fighting something, it's like street gangs or maybe like a couple of zombies or something. So it's much easier to manage that stuff. Where the times where we've had kind of a swarm or a mob, it's always just been like, oh, a couple like they all just swarm around one person kind of a thing. And so really it becomes much deadlier for the players, but much easier to manage in terms of like where everybody is. So yeah, I would think maps, that's definitely a big thing. Like, if you can prep for it and you can do it, by all means. But if you're like me and you kind of struggle with map making on a local scale, just find stuff that people have used, repurpose it for yourself. Like, even if you just take the actual map itself and you don't take like the legend or the key or whatever, or descriptions of the rooms, and then you just throw your own stuff in there. To tie into that, I guess with 5th edition and 3rd edition in particular, speaking of, as far as stuff to put into those rooms, encounter building, and I struggle with encounter building in 3rd and 5th edition, because challenge rating, I think, is an abomination of a game mechanic. I vastly prefer 4th edition's way of doing it, where it just broke it down into monsters had levels, and their sort of quote unquote threat level or something was based on their level. So you could easily see like what the power level of a creature was. Challenge rating, it's for me, it's so arcane and archaic that, for example, like a CR2 creature, um, if you have two CR2 creatures, that is like a challenge for a 5th level party. And it's like, how does this work? It requires having to do formulas and bizarre math and stuff like that to get it to work. Whereas, with 4th edition, it was, you had minions. I think there were minions. And then you had standards, elites, and solos, right? Here's how it works. 4 minions are equivalent to 1 character of equivalent level. Standard is 1 character. 2 characters to an elite, 4 characters to a solo. Boom. And that's supposed to be like a suitable challenge. There you go. Simple. And then you can adjust, and then as far as adjusting the difficulty level, you can increase or decrease the individual levels of the monsters, and then they would all total up to an experience budget. So you could figure out, like, all right, so I have 4 5th level characters, and then what you would do is you could take 4 5th level standard monsters. That would be your experience budget, and then you could just increase or decrease it from there. And, figure, like, you don't really, like, if you wanted to make sure that you don't, one-shot all of the characters kind of thing, you don't vary the level too much. Try to keep it within, like, 3 levels of the party or something. With challenge rating, out the window. So it's like, I have to use an encounter calculator, because otherwise it doesn't work. And I can't figure it out. And even then, there are CR half monsters that are absolutely destroying my party. Like Bandit Thugs. Bandit Thugs get multi-attack. Bandit Thugs also have, like, advantage. Like, they have multi-attack and pack tactics or something bizarre like that. So yeah, that's just, it's kind of ludicrous. So, that's an example of, like, you put 2 of them together, should be not necessarily a problem for a party of 4 3rd level characters, and they just got wrecked. So yeah, I don't know. So if anyone has, like, if you're watching this video and you have suggestions for how to figure out this stupid, awful challenge rating system for 5th edition that doesn't require the use of an encounter calculator, please let me know, because this is something that I've struggled with since 3rd edition. Glad they got rid of it with 4th, and is one of my few major complaints of 5th edition. So yeah, leave me a comment, send me a message on Twitter at 8-Bit Adventures. You can also send me an email at Sean at 8-Bit Adventures, SEAN at 8-Bit Adventures. Make sure to use the number 8 and the hyphen. So yeah, I think this is going to about wrap it up. I don't want to get this video stretched too long. Maybe I'll do it a series or something like that. Maybe I'll write up an article about some other stuff. Might do an article. I much prefer reading longer pieces like that than watching a 45-minute video of talking about that stuff. So be on the lookout for that. If you want to see more stuff, you can find it over at 8-Bit Adventures. That is the number 8-bitadventures.com. Over there, you can find all of my social media links, as well as videos like this, the podcast, weekly webcomic strip, all that cool stuff. If you like that stuff, you can go check out patreon.com/8bitadventures. The sort of link is right above my head in this direction. Go over there. You can find some cool swag and stuff. Becoming a patron, I will love you forever if you do that. Big shout out to all the current patrons. And so thank you for that. With that said, hope you have enjoyed kind of this little look into being a dungeon master and some of the stuff that I have trouble with. So, and like I said, be on the lookout for maybe some more tips and an article and stuff like that. So with that, have fun, happy gaming, and enjoy your pie cake, everybody. Good night.